Hello everyone and welcome to another Motive tutorial video. In this video I'm going to be explaining the differences between 2D and 3D data. So I have my rigid body intro take here from the sample data, and one thing I want to mention is I'm going to be switching between this 2D and 3D mode a lot in this video. So pay careful attention to when I'm doing that because it's going to change a lot of things. So I'm going to start by being in 2D mode. And 2D mode is basically just the camera data, and that's all that's really saved in this 2D data. So if I went in here and I deleted my 3D data, all that would be left would be what is captured in the cameras. So in the cameras, this data, like if markers are out there and being shown in the volume, what's being captured and recorded are these positions. And of course, I'm in object mode right now, and this is what's being sent back is these positions, these calculated center of these markers, and all of these cameras have that calculated center, and all of that data is being combined to create this three-dimensional view. So just going back to my 2D view really quick, right now I have my coordinates and centroids turned on, and just to reiterate, this is the data that is being captured, and this is all handled in the camera itself, and there's lots of settings. So if I have my reconstruction settings open, things like this 2D object filter, this is all handled as 2D data, and this controls how this data is being captured by the camera. And then when it's sent back to Motive, it undergoes this reconstruction process. And a reconstruction process is basically just taking all of that data, combining it together, and creating a three-dimensional image. So in 2D, this reconstruction process, the idea of taking all of this data, combining it to make a three-dimensional marker, this is happening on a frame-by-frame basis, where in 3D, this is all baked in. The entire take has this three-dimensional reconstructed marker data in it. So a really simple way to see this is I've gone ahead and went into my reconstruction settings and disabled this point cloud reconstruction. And we're going to be in 2D data mode. And you can see that if I scrub the timeline, nothing's happening in this perspective view. You can go into the camera preview and you can see markers moving around, but nothing's happening in the perspective view, and that's because this point cloud reconstruction isn't enabled. But if we go into 3D mode, we can see that there are markers, and that's because I've already done a reconstruction on here. It's just that these reconstruction settings that are happening are not being applied to this 3D data because it's already been reconstructed, where the 2D data does it on a frame-by-frame basis. So just to show a practical application of this, I'm going to enable my point cloud reconstruction. I'm going to be in 2D data. I'm going to select some of these markers. I'm also going to show I'm going to move a frame forward a couple times just to enable that point cloud reconstruction. Select these and show the tracked rays. And this basically shows how the cameras are seeing these. So all these rays are pointing to a camera, and this camera is contributing to the calculation of this three-dimensional marker. So if we just take this one, we can see all the cameras that are contributing to how this marker is calculated. So one of our options in here is minimum ray count. So this is the minimum number of cameras that need to be able to calculate the center of this marker to reconstruct it in 3D. So if I set this something like 100 and we move a few frames, we can see that we are reconstructing 0 markers because we don't have 100 cameras. But maybe let's lower it to something like 30, move a couple frames, and we can see that these markers have enough cameras to be seen, but we still can't see these other markers because not enough cameras are seeing them. So let's say we just wanted to reconstruct these markers. If we go to 3D data, we can see that these markers are still here. And that's because the 3D data already is reconstructed. It's a full take of reconstructed data right here. But in this 2D data, we see it's not updating. So if we want our 2D data to reflect our, if we want our 3D data to reflect our 2D data, we just need to reconstruct our take. And we can see that the other markers that were only being tracked by by less than 30 cameras are not being reconstructed. So we can go back to 2D, we can set this down to a more reasonable number, like 3 or 2 is fine. 2 is the minimum amount for motion capture. Another good way to see this is to go into the timeline editor. So I'm going to be in 2D data. I'm going to go into my editor and select markers, and this says marker data not active. But if I go into 3D and I select these markers, I get these are what is known as trajectories, and they're basically, it's showing me my X, Y, and Z of our selected markers. So let me just select one of them, and we can see it's moving along as the marker moves. And this is, once again, the XYZ trajectory of this marker. So the reason you don't see this graph in the 2D data mode, so if we go to 2D data, there's no marker data, but the reason we don't see this graph here is because remember that 2D data is just the camera data. It's just where this calculated center is, or at least in object mode, where the calculated center of this marker is. So the cameras have no idea where this marker is going to get reconstructed in the 3D volume. And it does so in this 2D data mode on a frame-by-frame basis. So in this 2D data mode, it's doing this whole reconstruction process each frame. And I like to think of this 2D data as sort of a preview for what 3D data will look like, but none of this data is actually saved. Where in 3D data, we have this whole trajectory for our markers. So a friend of mine made a really good image for this. So we can see that 2D data has markers. It has data that is saved that has the ability to calculate where it is in three-dimensional space, but it's purely on a frame-by-frame basis, where 3D data, it has the complete trajectory of this marker, where 2D data is just each frame calculating the three-dimensional position by itself. So you can think of reconstruction, or at least 3D data, as drawing the line between these frames and saying, this is the same marker, this is one trajectory. Like we have in here, this is one complete trajectory based on the 2D data. All right, I know that was a lot of technical information really quickly, but if you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end. I know that 2D and 3D data really confused me when I was starting out, so it's important to go and look at these two different modes on your own and see if you can really get down the fundamental differences in these two and how they relate to each other. And I know I'll be talking about 2D and 3D data a lot more in the other videos as well. Probably just more specific things on how they relate to things like rigid bodies or skeletons or exporting data, things like that. Thank you everyone for watching, and as always, thank you for choosing OptiTrack.